In these early tutorials, my main goal is to give you a broad strokes understanding of the main categories of things that you can do in Unity, as well as set you up with some cool mechanics and scripts and capabilities to make some cool prototype experiences. Later on, you'll be specializing in areas that you have interest in mastering in more depth, which means that for now, there's going to be some things that I present you and explain in brief, but that I don't fully explain. That's because some of you, as I maximize my screen a bit more here, will not be very interested in actually understanding the inner workings of, for example, how to get our player to move. You might be totally happy having a fairly generic rudimentary movement scheme for your experiences that you just kind of apply and then never think about again. That could totally be enough for you. Or maybe you think about it the opposite way. Maybe you want controls to be very meticulously precise, but you're not so concerned about the visuals being spectacular. You're okay with it being a bit of a hackier prototype style visual experience. It's up to you and your design goals overall, which means that in some of these videos, I will be giving you some assets to work with so that you don't have to type as much. And if you want to ignore the inner workings of how some of these things happen, you can. You just need to know how to get them up and running in the first place. So let's dive in. In this video and the next one, we're going to set up two different control schemes, this one being the simpler one. So if you take a look at the files that I've sent you online, you should have a Week 2 project scripts folder. If you can't find this, or you're some random internet wanderer coming across this video and you don't have access to this, you can either pull the Git project from the last video in this tutorial or just copy down the code manually. But if you have the code from me sent to you in the scripts, the one that's most relevant to us right now is going to be the simple player controller. And what we want to do is head to our scripts folder in our project and then click and drag this script down into Unity so that it is imported into our project. And now you have some code that's written by me in assistance with a few other resources I've researched to create a nice, relatively simple, smooth moving experience. What I want to do with my player is actually attach this movement script to it. There's two ways I can do so. The simplest being I click and drag over into the inspector, or if I remove this, I can actually click add and then search for the name, simple player controller, and it should find it in my list of resources and I can add it here. This controller has some information that we need to know how to work with, A, to customize how it feels, but B, to actually get it to work in the first place. Because if I try to run this without applying some of these settings, then our program is actually not going to control properly whatsoever. We're going to have these red errors showing up. So something that we need to understand about how Unity works is that there's communication that happens all the time between scripts, which are basically files of code, and Unity itself, that we need to interface in different ways. Sometimes there's information in a script that we have access to in Unity. For example, if I open up by double-clicking the simple player controller script, at the top of it, I see something that may confuse some of you who haven't studied coding before, but let me explain in brief. Something called a variable, which is really just a container for some information. This top piece of information is on mouse sensitivity, and we give it some number. And then there's speed, which is the speed of motion, and I give it some other number. By making these public, I've allowed Unity to view them and change them. So you'll see that this 100 appears in Unity, and as does the 12 for the other setting for speed. Because it's public, I give Unity permission to, if I want to, change the information, hit enter, and now this data is going to be 10 instead of 12. It doesn't actually change the script, but if there's ever a debate between the programs, Unity wins. So I can actually have access to change this data right here in Unity. However, there's some times where my scripts need access to something. This line needs access to the transform, meaning the location information about my player, as well as an access to the character controller that's responsible for all these behaviors we talked about in the last video. This is an example of somewhere where I have to provide the connection manually. I actually have to click and drag this transform into this slot, as well as the character controller into this slot to connect this game's character to this script. I also have gravity, which I've just set to the real world gravity value. You can change this either by typing in a number or, as always, clicking and dragging sideways. I'm just going to turn this back to 9.81. And then the jump height, which determines how high my character can jump. Now, if I've set these values appropriately, I should be able to press play and press left, right, front and back, and move my mouse to turn my character and press space to jump. But I have an issue here, which is that, well, first of all, I don't seem to be following the player with the camera at all. It's just kind of a stuck view, which is kind of cool. It's kind of fun to see my little beautiful guy wandering around this world. And let's see if I can fall him off the edge. And there he goes, off to oblivion. And I need to do something with my camera to make this work a little bit better. In a simple character controller like this, the way we want to work with the camera is using hierarchies, where I have a main camera, and if you don't have one in your scene at all, right-click, create camera. Make sure you only have one, or otherwise Unity can get confused. And one thing I can do simply is set the camera in a position that I'm happy with it following the player. The easiest way to do this, other than just moving it around manually, is to fly your scene view to the location that you want. So I might do like an over-the-shoulder view, maybe like this. And with the camera selected, go Game Object, Align with View. And now the camera has snapped to the position and rotation that I was looking at things with. The next thing I want to do, well, actually, let's just preview this, just to see that the camera is now in a different location. Now I can see my player from this different perspective. Can I get a better sense of its controls? Okay. But if I take my camera and I drag it onto my player, so that's a part of this hierarchy, this means that the camera will now obey any of the changes that happen to its parent. So now if I go in and move my player forward, the camera moves with it. If I go left or right or backwards, the camera goes with it. And as I turn my mouse to move, if you watch the shadow, you'll see that I'm actually rotating. Now in this basic movement script, I haven't put any up and down camera motion. It's simply just kind of orbiting around, rotating with the player and moving around. But I can jump and I can move, and I have some nice control that I can tweak this as I see fit by maybe changing the speed. And here's one quick other tip about Unity that I forget if I've mentioned before or not, but while the game's running, anything that I change won't be memorized. I can just test things out to my heart's content, and when I press stop, it'll revert back to the previous values. For example, what if I make this 50 instead of 10? Now my character zips around crazy fast. Be careful not to fall off the edge. And if I press stop play, notice it goes back to the original value of 10. So if I wanted it to be 50 permanently, I have to change it now that my run is complete. So this allows me to change things, play with the sensitivity, play with the jump height. What if I want to just see what happens if I make the jump height 10? The gravity, won't leave it the same. My mouse sensitivity, let's triple this. And just experiment with a control scheme that feels good to me. This mouse sensitivity is quite strong now, but maybe that's okay for me. And that jump height, I really launch up there. And me as the game developer has, well, the power over deciding what these values are. Something that I recommend that you do right now is customize this control scheme to feel good in a way that you like. And one thing that might help you do so is just to add a few random spheres or random things into your world. Maybe scale them up a little bit, make these things a little bit bigger, and place them around in your world in different capacities so that you have at least something that you're able to interact with. And now let me open this up here and show you something that if I run into these objects, the character controller can't push them over. They're just kind of permanent walls that block my progress. And I can kind of see, a little glitchiness there, that I can jump on top of them and jump off of it. And so I want to get a sense of like what might be the right settings and parameters as you kind of land this jump. It's kind of hard to tell with this control scheme. Oh, almost. What are the right numbers for this player that feel good to me to wander around a little mini world with so that I can get a little bit more customized in my control? If you're someone who's interested in actually working with customizing controls or even coding in general, I highly recommend that you pop in and read through the code and get a better sense of how this code actually works. I've included comments to explain different sections, and even if you're not studying coding, why not just improve your understanding a bit more? Do a quick read through. You might not understand every single thing, but you might get a decent sense of how Unity is actually working with various things, like vector 3, which means X, Y, and Z coordinates, with accessing our input system, this system that we have in Unity for, under Edit, Project Settings, horizontal, vertical, mouse information. I'm getting access to the horizontal, vertical, and mouse axes to be able to change the way my character moves and has information about its location in its transform, which is this system right here. So dabble in that insofar as you're interested, and in the next video, we're going to actually create a more advanced movement system.